As I explained in the previous lecture, these problems are related to equipment. Equipment-related problems have specific associated keywords. So if you carefully read the sentences and look for the related correct answers, you'll be fine. Let's solve problem number 201. The problem states that the amplitude of the echo changes depending on the depth. Depending on whether the depth increases or decreases, such changes in amplitude can occur. It's asking which system controls these kinds of things. The change in amplitude according to depth is related to the time gain compensation, or TGC for short, which is answer C. You can consider these things to be related. Also, if there are questions about adjusting various intensities according to depth, you can consider answer C to be correct as well. Just make sure to pay attention to the related keywords. Next, let's move on and look at question 202. For this question as well, you can find the correct answer directly from what the question is asking. The ultrasound system that reduces electric noise is the rejection, yes, the rejection wave mentioned here. These are all related to the functions of the receiver. You need to remember exactly what each of their roles are. Since this question is asking about the function of removing noise, you can choose this answer. The receiver is always included in exam questions, so make sure to organize the related items and questions well. Next, let's move on and look at question 203. Since this question is important, let me emphasize that first. The main point of this question is to check whether you understand the difference between pre-processing and post-processing in image processing. The most basic concept for distinguishing between these two is that during inspection, you press the freeze button. When you press this button, the image freezes, so you can consider the state before pressing the button as pre-processing. The processes that occur after pressing the button and the image has frozen can be classified as post-processing. An important point to remember is that the concepts of pre-processing and post-processing always appear on the exam. In this question, you are asked to choose the incorrect statement regarding lead magnification and lead zoom. The correct answer would be option A. Since lead zoom is a typical post-processing method, you can select option A, which says it's pre-processing, as the correct answer. The remaining options B and C, as well as the next choice, are all related to lead magnification. In simple terms, you can summarize that these options are related to the characteristics of post-processing. To summarize once again, remember the concepts of pre-processing and post-processing through this question. Since the task here is to find the incorrect option, remember that lead is a representative concept of post-processing. Therefore, option A is the incorrect answer. It would be good to remember the characteristics of options B, C, and even D through this question. Next, let's move on and look at question 204. If you look at the question, it's asking about a specific term. So it says that a pulse is transmitted from the transmitter. It's asking about the term related to what ratio these things should be done at. When it comes to pulses, sending out pulses and modifying the number of times this happens is related to option B. So, pulse repetition frequency refers to a concept that's related to how many times pulses are sent out, which is different from the basic frequency we usually know. So if the PRF is measured to be high, it means that a lot of pulses are being emitted. Conversely, if the PRF is low, it means that the number of pulses is also reduced, and that's the state in which the transmitter is emitting them. Since this was a question about terminology, it would be good to remember this concept through the sentence in the question itself. Next, let's move on and look at question 205. This question contains elements that could be confused with the Doppler concept, so I won't go through the solution separately. Right now, we're working on questions related to the characteristics of the equipment. Since it's not particularly relevant or important, let's move on to the solution for question 206. If you look at the question, it's related to the functions of a receiver. As I mentioned earlier, I explained that this is an important question. We need to carefully go over each point. It's asking which function reduces the signal from the smallest part to the largest part. The key point related to this is the concept of compression, which is answer C. Additionally, another point related to compression is what's called the dynamic range. Keep in mind that this concept is also related to what we've discussed. Next, let's move on and look at question 207. This is also a question about the functions of a receiver. Among the functions of the receiver listed below, it asks which part cannot be directly controlled by the inspector. You need to memorize this part. The correct answer is C. In Korean, this function is called demodulation, and it's a function that is performed automatically by the equipment itself. Functions like amplification, compensation, or reaction are functions of the receiver that the inspector can adjust. Next, let's move on and look at question 208. For this question, you can think of it as a pattern where you remember the content through solving the problem. We're conducting a thyroid ultrasound examination, and yes, it explains that pre-processing and post-processing functions are being applied. This is a question where you need to choose the option related to post-processing. You can consider C as the correct answer for this one. Remember that techniques like rearranging the grayscale map are related to post-processing. In the frozen image state, this technique rearranges the grayscale here to make masses or lesions stand out more clearly. So, through this question, you can see that grayscale map assignment is a post-processing method. If you look at the other options, something like right zoom in option A is a representative example of pre-processing. Read zoom, which we solved in the previous question, can be considered a post-processing method. An easier way to remember this is that, in order to read something, you first write the text and then read it. That's the order. So, if you remember it as write first, then read, I think you'll be able to memorize the content for a longer time. For the rest of the content, you can just think about what we do when we perform an examination. You can adjust the TGC before pressing freeze, right? These are typical examples of pre-processing. Next, things like scale line density and power control are also factors that can be sufficiently adjusted before you press freeze. So once again, I want to emphasize the importance of pre-processing and post-processing. Next, let's move on and look at question number 209. This is a concept related to the question we just solved. Here, let's focus on a different keyword. We're examining the liver metadam area, and they're trying to increase the contrast resolution. This question is asking which aspects should be adjusted to improve the resolution here. The most important point is that the keyword related to contrast resolution is the term grayscale. Even if you're not exactly sure what this is, since the most relevant keyword among these elements is grayscale, you should choose option D. As I explained earlier, these techniques are representative post-processing methods, and after identifying the lesion, they are post-processing techniques that can further increase the contrast of the lesion. As a reference through this question, you can see that the term contrast is related to grayscale. If you just organize this point well, it will be helpful when solving problems. Next, let's move on and look at question 210. For this question as well, you can organize the concepts through problem solving, aphodization or beam steering, focusing, and aperture control. Overall, these are methods that alter the way the beam travels, such as steering it to one side or changing its size. The part that controls and changes the shape of the beam in this way is called the beamformer. Through this, you can see that the direction and size of the beam are controlled in this part. Simply put, it's like an aperture. So you can remember it together with a structure that changes the shape of light, like an aperture.